Bom, pessoal, bom dia a todos. Hoje a gente vai ter um workshop aqui com o pessoal da OpenID Foundation para falar do o OpenID Foundation responsável pela elaboração do motor de conformidade. A gente lembra a todos que a certificação de segurança ela é obrigatória para as instituições que entrarem em produção. Hoje a gente vai ter um workshop voltado muito para a fase 3. A gente já fez algumas semanas atrás um workshop para a fase 2 e disponibilizamos no canal do YouTube, então quem não teve a oportunidade de ver e tenha interesse, pode acessar o canal do Open Bank. Esse aqui também vai ser disponibilizado no canal do Open Bank. E aí eu queria poder falar um pouquinho com vocês aqui que o workshop ele vai ser levado todo em inglês, né, com o pessoal da OpenID Foundation, mas que a gente disponibiliza um serviço de tradução simultânea, tá? E aí, como que funciona esse serviço? Né? Não sei se todos estão cientes. A gente tem uma empresa, né, que aqui responsável é o Alex, que está conduzindo esse serviço. E ele disponibiliza ele por meio de uma outra plataforma, que é o Zoom. Vocês podem encontrar o link do Zoom na descrição do invite. Então, para aqueles que não ingressarem, conseguem me ouvir, pessoal? Vocês estão me ouvindo?
Sim.
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 Perfeito.
Sim.
Então, vocês podem encontrar o link do Zoom na descrição do invite. Eu vi que algumas pessoas já entraram lá. E aí, basicamente, a gente vai ter aqui no Teams, com o pessoal da OpenID Foundation, o áudio original em inglês e o vídeo. E no Zoom, a gente vai ter somente o áudio traduzido em português. Então, para você poder usufruir da tradução simultânea, você precisa estar online, você precisa estar ativo nos dois aplicativos, tanto no Teams quanto no Zoom, tá? A gente disponibilizou aí também no invite um PDF, que é esse aqui que vocês estão vendo na tela, com as instruções, né, para a utilização da tradução simultânea. De maneira geral, tem 3 opções que vocês podem recorrer. A primeira é utilizar o Teams e o Zoom como aplicativo no computador ou no seu dispositivo aberto, né? Nesse caso, o Teams ele vai servir como o áudio, como a tela, né? E o Zoom como um áudio. Então, a gente pede que vocês tirem o som do Teams, né? E escutem pelo Zoom e enxerguem, né? E vejam a tela pelo Teams, tá? Uma segunda opção é utilizar os 2 aplicativos pelo navegador, para quem não tem os aplicativos instalados. Também de maneira análoga, a gente segue com o Teams para o vídeo, né? E o Zoom para o áudio. Então, aí no PDF vocês encontram as instruções, mas basicamente vocês vão lá no Teams e desativam o som do site, né? E escutem somente pelo Zoom, tá? E uma terceira opção aqui é uma questão de utilizar em aplicativos diferentes. Aí aqui talvez a opção em dispositivos diferentes. Então, vocês escutam talvez pelo telefone e conectam no Teams pelo computador. Essa opção aqui talvez é a mais fácil de configurar, então vocês colocam, por favor, em um dos dispositivos que vocês estejam no Teams, coloquem o áudio, né, no mudo, para que vocês possam escutar somente do Zoom. E a gente reforça aqui que seria interessante utilizar o Teams na tela maior, né? Então, se vocês estiverem usando, por exemplo, o telefone e o computador, utilizem o Teams no computador para a tela maior, porque é onde a gente vai estar vendo justamente o pessoal da OpenID Foundation apresentar e tudo mais. Acho que com relação à tradução simultânea é isso. O último ponto importante aqui para falar só é que o pessoal da OpenID Foundation eles vão estar conectados no Teams. Então, sempre que tiver uma dúvida, mande pelo Teams. Ou abra o microfone e pergunte. Pode ser em inglês, talvez pode ser em português, a gente pode fazer a tradução se tiver algum problema. Ou então, manda no chat também do Teams, que a gente tenta endereçar por lá, tá? As instruções, eu volto a dizer, estão no PDF em anexo, no invite. O link do Zoom também. Se tiver alguma dúvida para conectar, alguma dificuldade, pode mandar mensagem para a equipe da Miro, que a gente auxilia vocês aqui a acessarem a plataforma, enfim, a conduzirem aqui o serviço de tradução simultânea. Alguma dúvida, pessoal, com relação à tradução simultânea? Se não, eu já gostaria de passar a palavra aqui para o pessoal da OpenID Foundation.
Eu só queria fazer um adendo, tá? Aqui a gente está falando da certificação de segurança, ela é mandatória para entrar em produção, tá? Mas quem já se certificou na fase 2 no modelo FAPI, não precisa se certificar novamente, tá? Então, é uma única certificação para todas de segurança para todas as fases do Open Event, tá? Então, aqui as instruções vão ser voltadas para quem vai entrar na fase 3 e vai se certificar utilizando as APIs da fase 3, tá? Workshop a todos.
Boa, Paulo. Então, pessoal, vou mudar para o inglês aqui para o pessoal da OpenID Foundation ficar por dentro. So let's switch to English. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon for others. So now I want to give floor to the OpenID Foundation team. I don't know if Mike or Joseph are online.
Sure, Zhao, this is Mike Les, OpenID Foundation Program Manager. Wanted to first thank all the participants for joining us today. The goal of today's workshop is to provide a comprehensive demonstration of the FAPI Conformance Suite for Brazil in support of Phase 3 institutions certifying their deployments of FAPI. And secondary goal is to provide ample time for questions and answers. So I will cue the answers up. You can come off of mute during the Joseph Heenan, the certification program lead, who will be doing the demonstration. We'll pause at certain points to allow for questions, but also feel free to put your questions in the chat, and I'll cue those up when appropriate for Joseph and others to answer. So thank you again, and I'd like to introduce Joseph Heenan, OpenID Certification Program Lead.
Thanks, Mike. So hi, everyone. There's no slides today, so I'm going to jump straight into a demo. Just a reminder, though, this is a follow-on from the previous workshop, so I'm not going to cover the content that we showed in the previous workshops, just going through the very basics of running the suite. I'm going to concentrate today on just what's changed since the last workshop. So if I just share my screen. So I'm just starting off by showing you the releases page for the suite, so that this is the main place you can look at to get information when things are changing in the suite. So the release you can see here is the one we made yesterday, which is the first release that supports using the payments API instead of the accounts API, because I believe a lot of the Phase 3 institutions will only support the payments API.
Hey Joseph, just a second. I'm sorry to interrupt you. It's just that I think we are having a problem here with the translation. I'm sorry. Just Alex, can you please check on that, because I think that maybe we achieved the maximum capacity on the Zoom, and some are not. Some people are not able to enter the Zoom room. Can you please help us?
Guys, check this real quick.
Alex, can you hear us?
Olá, pessoal, consigo? Eu estou dando uma olhada aqui, eu acredito. Eu estou vendo aqui exatamente o que está acontecendo.
Pessoal, sugiro a gente continuar aqui. De qualquer forma, depois a gente vai disponibilizar no YouTube. O Alex está verificando, a gente também tem aqui a equipe da Open Foundation, a gente precisa seguir a agenda com eles aqui, eles têm outros compromissos. Depois a gente disponibiliza no YouTube com a tradução simultânea também, para quem perder esse início, tudo bem? Vamos voltar aqui para a gente poder aproveitar o tempo do Joseph e do Mike. So, Joseph, we are checking the problem here, but I think we can move on and go on with the workshop and everything is okay. So I give you floor again. Thank you.
Okay, great, thank you. So yeah, as I was saying, this is the release we put out at the weekend. So it has payment support, and there's a link here to an example configuration, so you can see a working configuration for payments. So that's this page here, which now has 3 different examples on it. So obviously the one using payments is the third one. So this is a JSON config that you can just cut and paste into the conformance suite as before, and this one is just set up to use payments instead of the data endpoints. So I'm just going to run through some tests using that configuration now. So I've already logged into the conformance suite, and this is just the home page. So as before, we go to create a new test plan, and it remembers the previous configuration I've loaded, which already has many of the things set correctly. So FAPI1 Advanced Final Authorization Server Test. This example uses private key JOP client authentication. We're just using by value for request objects in this case, rather than using the pushed authentication request option. The profile here has to be Open Banking Brazil, and we're just using a plain response. So I will just copy the configuration from that page and paste it into the conformance suite. So all the fields are the same as before, but I'll again emphasize this alias field is used as part of the redirect fields. If you're copying this example configuration to create your own, you must change this value. This value is what means that the redirect URL for your test is unique, and that it doesn't interfere with other people that are running the same tests on the same server. So you should put something like your company name in there. If you don't do that, you'll quite often find that your test will be interrupted because somebody else is using that same alias. And obviously with 400 banks expected to be testing in this next phase, it's going to be a mess if you don't all use unique aliases. So just please make sure you use a unique value for your company here. So the changes for payments is that we now specify payments in the scope here instead of accounts. As always, there's a help field here, which tells you more about that and explicitly says a bit of help for Brazil. Then if we scroll down, there are some other changes. So obviously the resource URL we're testing against is now the payments initiation endpoint. The consent URL we're using is now the payment consents. And there is 2 new fields, the payment consent request JSON and the payment initiation request JSON. These are fields that you just need to put raw JSON into, which will become the body of each of the requests. So you'll need to refer to the standards and what is possible on your own server to get these set up correctly. Obviously, these examples are correct for the mock bank, but you may well need to use different values on your own bank. as before, once you've filled everything in, you just press create test plan, and then we can start running tests. So once the proceed with test button appears, okay, so this test has gone into interrupted. So if we scroll to the bottom of the test, if we get rid of this first so I can actually scroll to the bottom, we'll see the test has been stopped due to an alias config. So this means that somebody else is using the example configuration at the same time as me. If anybody on the call is doing that, it would be great if you could stop for a few minutes just so I can run the demo. But I'm going to try again and hopefully be successful next time. So I just press the proceed with test button. I've actually already logged into the mock bank in this session, so it didn't ask me for a username and password, but if you do need the username and password, they are on the wiki page with the example configuration. So I just click the that I consent and press continue. And then go back to the results page. Just wait a second. And then I get another proceed with test button and just do exactly the same process again. And then the test goes to passed, and then as before, you would return to the plan and run the next test. Just carry on, and some people that have listened to me before will remember that the next test requires that you reject the consent. So again, this time I don't select the consent button here and just press continue. Oh. Used to be what I did. Do I switch that off and switch this on? And unfortunately, someone else is still using the same alias, which is why I get this error again. So I'll just give that a quick go again.
Just scroll down, Joseph, and click cancel.
Is that what it is? Right. Sorry. Thanks, Ralph. Yeah, so I did that wrong. So let me just follow Ralph's advice instead. So yeah, just click the cancel button instead. So, okay, I don't know what happened there, but if the cancel button had worked there, then you would have seen this test go to pass. But the important point was that for this test, you do need to follow a slightly different flow. So again, nothing else has changed in adding the payment support. So you just carry on running through all the tests as usual, submit the certification as usual. So that's really all I had to demo today. So the payment support is currently in beta. We're taking on any feedback we get during this week about any problems people have if they try and use it, and we'll plan to publish the non-beta version on Monday next week. And then as soon as that's published, people can start submitting their certifications. And that's really the conclusion of today's formal presentation. So now we've got a lot of time set aside for any questions and answers people have.
Joseph, we have a couple of folks raising their hand. Feel free to speak up and ask your questions.
Paulo?
Para load, empurrar o computador.
Hi. I believe there are some people here that are seeing the tool for the first time. There are institutions that are only going live on phase 3. It would be good if you can give an overview on the fields that are required for the configuration, and mainly talking about the scopes and the APIs that should be used for the certification phase 3.
Okay, sure. I can go back and just cover that in a bit more detail. So this is just back to the configuration page again. We did walk through this in a lot of detail in the previous workshop, but just to go through again. So again, this is the alias field I mentioned, which needs to be used as part of the redirect URLs. This is actually explained quite thoroughly on the main site, which I forgot to show you earlier. So if we go to the main OpenID website and certification instructions and how to run the FAPI conformance tests, then there is a bunch of additional notes here just on setting up the tests. So in particular, you need to register some clients with the system being tested, and you need to register these two redirect URLs for the clients where you replace this part of the redirect URL with the field that you have with the same value that you've entered in this field here. The description field is just a free-form text field that you can use for your own reference so you can tell the difference between different configurations or different servers you're testing. The publish field should just be left as no. When you're ready to actually submit your certification, you publish your results then. This discovery URL is the main point where we know which server we're testing. So you would replace this with the .wellknown /OpenID configuration file location on your own authorization server. So that would have you be somewhere on your bank's domain name. And then there are two different clients that you need to create on your system. So this is the client ID on your authorization server for the first client. The scope to be used, which can either be OpenID and accounts or OpenID and payments. And this just alters which API the server believes it's testing. So if you put accounts, then it believes it's testing the data read API, and obviously for payments, it's testing the payment initiation API. There's going to be a further tweak to this later this week as well to cater for organizations that don't support the data API, or at least not the accounts read permission. So there'll be some communication coming out about that at the same point. I think it's already been approved by the relevant working group. The next field is the keys for the client. So this is the JWKS containing the private key that needs to be used to sign the request object and any client assertions and so on. And then there is the MTLS certificates that need to be used when connecting to the authorization server as that client. So there's a certificate, the private key, and any required certificate authority chain that your authorization server needs. And then this is repeated again for a second client that has a different client ID. The reason we need two clients is that one of the things that the suite tests is checking that various things are correctly bound to a client. So it tries creating an authorization code with one client and then using that authorization code with a different client, which the specification requires to be rejected. And then there are similar tests once we've got an access token, we'll try using the access token with the MTLS certificate for a different client than it was issued to. And that will that should be rejected because the access token should be bound to the MTLS certificate for one particular client. And then again, there's keys and certificates for the second client. And then just the last bit is FAPI Brasil Pacific. But again, every field has help if you hover over this I endpoint. And currently you can specify either the payment initiation API for this resource URL. This is the main URL that the test uses to test the access token that's issued is correct and correctly bound to the TLS certificate. So you can also use the accounts API, and with the change coming later this week, there's also the option to use the resources endpoint here, and the consents URL. Again, you can specify either the payments consent endpoint or the accounts one. And then there is CPF and CNPJ values. So depending on the requirements of your bank or your server, you'll be specifying one or other of these to represent the users or the companies that owns the bank account. And then these last two fields are only used if you're selecting payments. So if you're testing using the accounts API, you would leave these two blank.
This is Mike. We have, if this is a good point to pause, we do have a couple of questions.
Sure.
Bernardo, did you have a question? I noted that you raised your hand.
Coxinha ia perder mesmo, já sabia. Canoagem.
Sure, yeah.
Canoagem é aqueles papudos.
Okay. I have two questions actually. First, if let's assume that we are certifying with a single profile, like by value, MTLS, plain response, and later on we find a problem with that profile. Let's assume that for prod, because of that problem, you want to use like private key JOT. Will I be able to go prod with a different profile than the one I certify? That's the first one.
So that's partly a policy question, I believe. But my understanding is that you should be certifying the exact stack that you are running on production in exactly the same configuration. So obviously, if you're changing the configuration, you'll need to recertify.
Okay, and which leads to my next question. So if I certify in all profiles, then if I want to remove some of them or disable some of them to go prod, is that okay? Because then I'm certifying in all profiles, and if I have a problem with a specific profile, I can then disable to go prod.
Yes, it's okay. Provided your profile is correctly advertised on your well-known configuration endpoint file, that's fine. And it's something that we do actually recommend to different banks, is to certify as many as you can. But yes, you can switch profiles, provided your discovery metadata reflects which profile you want to support.
Right, so that's okay. That's a good strategy then. You certify in all of the profiles that you can, and then if you want to disable, it's fine because you're certified in all of them. That's correct, right?
That's correct. So look, the ecosystems put a lot of pain and attention to make sure that the discovery mechanisms that that the ecosystem has supports a very large number of banks. For example, there are some scenarios where TPPs will have to update their clients at 800 banks. That's why dynamic client registration is mandated, and so is dynamic client modification. So you can, you can support those changes. Remember that some of these you can't necessarily make that unilateral change. For example, if you have clients registered with TLS client auth and you turn off TLS client auth, you'll have to manage that messaging and manage that migration with your clients. If it's not so much of an issue to switch between PAR and redirect, but there are TPP impact and TPP considerations that you have to think about if you decided to do that post go live.
Yeah. My plan is to decide that before the go live. Now we focus on certifying all profiles, and then before I go live, we decide the one we want to use in production because of that the problem that you were describing. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, but again, just to emphasize, people should be certifying exactly what is in production. So you shouldn't be discovering new problems as you make a production system. If you do that, then your certification is invalid because you've changed the software or the hardware or the architecture or something.
So one question is, what is exactly the process once you're past the test? How can you ask for and what is the process for asking the official certification?
So this is covered on the website. So if I just go back to where I was on the instruction page, there's a how to request certification FAPI OPs link just here. So that describes the exact process for certifying. But the quick summary is that you download your results from the suite using a button that's labeled. Actually, I can just show you the button. If I go back to my test results, so there's a button here marked certification package, which once you're ready to certify, you press that button. You upload the terms and conditions page and just a signed document that's referenced in the instructions. That's just you asserting that you are fully compliant with the API and is signed by someone from the bank. Then you press this prepare certification package button, and that gives you a zip file that you then upload to our service desk, and then we process that and publish it if it all looks okay.
And so just to confirm, so one certification is about one specific profile. So if I want to comply with MTLS and private JWK, I need to have 2 certifications.
Yes, you'll end up with 2 zip files in that case, and we just submit them both. And you can submit both of them to us in a single service desk ticket.
Okay.
This is Mike Les with the OpenID Foundation. Please note I put the submission instructions link in the chat so you can capture it there. And we have a couple of other folks. Carlos, you have your hand up. Did you have a question for Joseph?
Yeah. Joseph said that the test with payments endpoint is still in beta, right? So if we do today the certification process, can we do with the and resource endpoints as well, or we need to wait until the payments endpoint goes on a release status?
So do you support the account read permission?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, it would be fine for you to certify just using the account read endpoint.
So there will be no difference between FAPI profiles for data sharing, reading, and payments will be the same profile used for both cases, right?
Correct. Yeah, the security profile is exactly the same for both.
There will not be difference, like, because on the OpenID website we saw profiles like FAPI and FAPI RW. For the Open Banking Brazil, we will have just one type of FAPI profile, right? That's
correct. Yeah, it's a little bit complicated because the FAPI profile changed name at the beginning of the year. So the previous draft of the specification was called FAPI Read Write, but this has now changed name to FAPI Advanced.
Okay.
So yeah, they're essentially the same profile, except that Advanced is the final version of the specification, and Brazil is always using Advanced, the latest final version.
Okay. And my next question is about the payment process with Miro. Can I do in Portuguese? Tem alguém aqui para poder fazer essa pergunta? Eu acho que não seria para o Joseph, né?
Pode sim, Carlos.
É porque nós já recebemos o invoice, né, do pagamento, que vai vir agora em agosto, só que o nosso processo ainda está em processo de pagamento, né? A nota já veio. Só que, por exemplo, se eu quiser certificar agora, eu não posso, eu tenho que esperar a nota ser paga para mandar o arquivo?
Não, você pode seguir com o processo assim que o motor tiver liberado para certificação, você pode fazer todo o processo com eles.
Tá.
A questão do pagamento a gente vai resolver direto com a OpenID Foundation, tá?
Tá bom. É porque assim, ele me falou que eu posso me certificar com a parte de read, né? Porque a nossa instituição, o BRB, ele vai entrar só na fase 3 agora. Só que se eu precisar testar, se eu precisar me certificar hoje para adiantar, eu teria que ter os endpoints de consents e resources, por exemplo, para ter o de leitura, né? O de compartilhamento de dados. Eu poderia me certificar usando esses dois, porque eu me certificaria no perfil FAPI e no DCR, usando esses dois endpoints. E assim que eles soltarem o de payments para release, né? Eu poderia me certificar com a parte funcional depois, isoladamente, né? Ou não, eu tenho que esperar o de payment sair para fazer isso também. Entendeu? É porque...
Ajudando aqui, você está correto, tá? É isso mesmo, tá? Quem está pronto para certificar a fase 2 já pode pedir a certificação, tá? Então, se você implementa as APIs de dados, você pode pedir a certificação usando a API de consentimentos da fase 2, né? E a API de accounts, tá? E daí, quando você vai lançar os testes funcionais, né, da fase 3, tá? Que são os testes de segurança. Quando lançar os testes funcionais da fase 3, a versão final, você pode fazer os testes funcionais e certificar funcionalmente na fase 3, tá?
Tá, porque sexta-feira lá naquela conversa que teve com o pessoal, acho que o Pedro estava lá também. Falaram que eu podia usar o endpoint de resources em vez de usar o endpoint de accounts, né, para o teste da fase 2, né? É isso mesmo? Eu entendi correto?
Inicialmente poderia usar o teste de resources, tá? Mas teve uma mudança no grupo de especificações, né, de segurança, que determinou um conjunto mínimo de grupos de permissões, tá? Então, o grupo resources talvez não funcione mais, tá? Teria que recertificar, pedir só para resources. Talvez,
então, teria que usar consents.
A gente pediu um ajuste para ele mandar todas as permissions, tá? Mas eu não sei se já foi feito e se isso resolveria de fato, tá? Eu vou tentar fazer um teste e eu confirmo, tá? Mas essa mudança, né, de agora ter grupos de permissions validados, teve um impacto aqui no uso da API de resources.
Tá bom, então eu teria que usar payments e consents mesmo, né? Consents de compartilhamento, tá? Beleza.
Espera aí.
Ok. Ou aguardar o de payments ficar liberado para eu fazer com o de payments, né? Para ele vir para release, né? Em vez de beta. Tá bom, muito obrigado. Eram essas que eu tinha.
Bernardo, você quer trazer alguma dúvida?
Okay, I think we answered. I believe that. Go ahead.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Bernardo.
Sorry to bother you guys again. Can I ask the question?
Please proceed with your question, Bernardo.
Okay. So the first one is, I understand that it's multiple submissions, one per profile, but it's a single payment, right? Or do I need to pay for each profile, like one for private key, another for MTLS, and so on? Or it's a single payment?
It's a single payment for all the profiles. The only case where an extra payment is needed is if you're certifying for FAPI CIBA as well, but I think that's not happening until around the November timeframe.
Right, and my next and hopefully final question is, you got me a little bit confused with your last statement regarding my question. So the thing that I'm worried is, if I certify null profiles, this does not mean that I must support all these profiles in production, right? If I want to certify all of them and later on use a single profile in production, it is okay, right?
Yes, that's basically okay. You should probably let us know and we'll remove the certifications for the profiles you're not using. But I will again emphasize the point that you're going to be making an assertion to the central bank that you certified what is your actual production architecture and so on. So I'm not quite following the logic of following this process.
Okay, Joseph, go ahead.
Just I don't know if you want to reply to this question, or can I move to another one? All right. So, like, one question is, I don't know exactly who said it, but once I'm certified with a certain profile and with a certain configuration, if I change anything in that configuration, for example, I don't know, if I change the DNS or something like that, my certification is now invalid. What does that mean? Once that happens, what are the consequences? If I just change something and not certify again.
I guess that's quite an involved question that has different angles. From the OpenID Foundation point of view, if we became aware of that you were no longer in compliance with the profile, then we'd contact you and perhaps ask you to recertify, or see the eventual position would be that if we were sure you weren't compliant, the certification would be revoked. The other angle is that my understanding is that the banks have to make an assertion to the central bank that the system they have FAPI certified is, to all intents and purposes, identical to their production system. So I presume sending something to the central bank that may turn out not to be true would have particular consequences. But not being Brazilian, I can't speak to what those are.
Yeah, it makes sense. I wasn't aware of this assertion about like asserting that our configuration production is the same as the certification, but I'm gonna look for that later. Thanks.
Joseph, we have a couple questions in the chat we should queue up. You might want to switch over there just to take a look. I'll highlight the, there was a question about the test with payment endpoint is still in beta, right? Question. So can we do the certification process with the consents, V1 consents, and resources, V1 resources endpoints?
So this, I think I did try to answer this earlier. So if I remember correctly, the current suite requires that you support the accounts read permission. If you don't support that permission, you can't certify at the moment. So if you do support that accounts read permission, you can certify. There's no way in the Brazilian security profile to get access to just the resources endpoint, so you can't test using purely the resources endpoint. So, the two options on the table at the moment are the accounts endpoint or the payment initiation endpoint. There are, I believe, 1 or 2 banks that don't support the accounts read permission, but do support a different read permission. So we're expecting a release later this week, hopefully, that should enable those banks to certify. And I think that will use the resources endpoint, but it will still require the bank to give a permission other than just the resources read permission.
Thanks for that, Joseph. There was a second question in the chat. It's from Julio. The question is, I don't know if it was clear to me, but for certification, does the front end also have to be built, or would it be enough for the back end to be ready for us to be certified?
I mean, you will definitely need some front end. From the OpenID Foundation point of view, you don't need an awfully comprehensive front end built to be able to certify. But this does go back to this same point I was making, that you're making an assertion to the central bank that what you are doing your FAPI certification for is, to all intents and purposes, identical to what you're going to be putting into production. And that sounds like it's that latter point where certifying without a complete front end could come unstuck.
Just to comment on that, remember, this is only part 1 of the certification process. You also have to pass the functional certification suite for payments, which uses a very similar setup. And in that setup, one of the tests is to take a screenshot of your consent screens and processes, and they'll be passed to the, I believe, to the UX working group to make sure that they meet the UX and customer experience guidelines. So whilst you may be able to pass the OIDF tests, you won't be able to pass the functional tests without that appropriate check and those screens and customer elements being built.
Thanks for that, Ralph. We have another question. Igo, please go ahead.
I mean, this is not a question. I'm going to switch to Portuguese because this is a question for Miro, not necessarily for you guys. Tem alguém da Miro aqui, né?
Tem sim, Iago. Pode falar.
Então, isso que ele falou é uma coisa que eu não estava sabendo, assim, de tem algum tipo de assertion que a gente tem que fazer para o Banco Central de que a nossa configuração de produção é a mesma que a gente está usando para, que é a mesma que está certificada, né? Como tem algum lugar que está documentado esse processo? Ou como que vai ser feito isso?
Alguém aqui do squad de Sandbox consegue endereçar essa pergunta?
Pelo menos sabe se alguém que eu possa perguntar para ver como é que funciona isso, ou se isso realmente é uma coisa.
Então, deixa eu entrar aqui. Raoni, não é o termos e condições? Desculpa, eu não entendi. Que são os termos e condições que tem que assinar, inclui essa afirmação, né?
Opa, desculpa, pessoal, estava falando no mudo. É isso mesmo, tá? São termos e condições que são preenchidos no momento que você pede a certificação funcional, tá? Quando a gente faz a de segurança, tem dois documentos que, na hora de gerar o pacote, que ele mostrou, né? Um é um termo básico, que é só copiar e colar, né? Que são as condições. E outro é o compliance, que você manda de responsabilidade para a OIDF, tá? Quando a gente fez o funcional, a gente trouxe esse mesmo modelo de ter dois documentos, né, em termos e condições e assinatura, né, e lá você, nesses termos e condições, você está dizendo que o seu deployment, né, a sua arquitetura, a sua infraestrutura seguem os mesmos modelos em homologação, tá? Então você tem essa visão, tá? Você faz isso, tá? Você não tem que mandar um e-mail para o Banco Central nem nada, simplesmente assinar esse termo e na hora de pedir de certificação isso vai anexado e você está se comprometendo com isso, tá?
Certo. Isso vai anexado junto com aquele certification package ali que eles mostraram. Os termos e condições está naquele pacote ali, certo?
Isso, aqui é a visão da certificação de segurança com a OIDF, mas no teste funcional
Sim,
tem a mesma coisa.
A mesma
tá?
coisa,
Então,
tá.
são os dois, tá? Nesse
Tá,
certificado,
beleza.
nesse pacote de certificação funcional, vai ter esse termos.
Tá, obrigado.
Eu enviei aqui no chat os dois documentos referentes à certificação funcional para a fase 2. Vai ser semelhante para a fase 3. Então, esses dois termos não são os que têm que ser anexados para o OpenID Foundation, mas sim para o motor que a gente vai liberar do Open Banking Brasil. E nele, no primeiro documento, tem uma cláusula, tem um termo que você atesta que o seu ambiente testado, caso não seja o ambiente de produção, ele é uma cópia do ambiente de produção.
Certo. Obrigado. So yeah, that was it from my end. Just some regulatory specific Open Banking Brazil questions, but you can move ahead.
Carlos, did you have another question?
De novo, para o pessoal aí Paulo, para vocês de novo. Só para confirmar então, essa parte de arquitetura, o meu deployment, que eu tenho que garantir que é igual ao de produção, isso inclui o front-end também, então, por exemplo, o layout, eu tenho que testar exatamente com os mesmos CSS ali, igualzinho o que vai estar em produção, porque assim, a nossa ideia era adiantar esse teste. Né?
Tem que ser o mesmo software, tá? Você precisa ter o seu front-end pronto. Depois você for fazer mudanças de CSS, esquemas, daí são mudanças que não impactam a sua arquitetura, certo, né? Só questões visuais, tá? Mas a sua arquitetura, de fato, tem que estar estabelecida, tá? Então, você não pode ter mudanças significativas na sua implementação, tá?
Não, então, se eu não mudar a minha arquitetura, ok, né? Então, mas eu posso mudar, por exemplo, o layout, não teria problema.
Exatamente, não tem problema daí. Mudanças de layout, não tem problema. Tá? E aqui é algo que o controle acaba ficando dentro da sua própria instituição, né? Se você fez uma mudança no seu software e você entende que ele não impacta significativamente sua arquitetura, que ele não traz riscos para a sua certificação, ok. Agora, se você faz uma mudança maior, você deveria se recertificar, tá? E isso não tem como o ecossistema verificar, né? Exceto caso você faça uma mudança que comece a quebrar, as instituições falem, opa, você estava certificado, mas não está mais funcionando, por quê, né? E daí vai começar o processo de disputa e tudo mais, né? Então, mas aqui é um autocontrole, né? Que as instituições precisam ter e saber, né? Olha, mudança de CSS, layout, cara, não muda nada. Não, eu estou trocando aqui, em vez de Java, Spring Boot, estou trocando para Angular. Eu posso estar inserindo um risco aqui, porque é uma arquitetura totalmente nova aqui do meu front-end.
Ok. Tá bom.
Ô, Paulo, pode responder mais uma nesse cenário aí de conformance? As instituições que vão suportar mais de um tipo de redirect, app-to-web, web-to-web, todos eles precisam passar no conformance? Como que vai ser essa parte em relação a múltiplos tipos de redireção?
Acho que essa é uma boa pergunta, tá? A certificação, ela faz um único teste, né? Então, você vai pôr o seu dispositivo e testar. Então, você pode certificar usando web ou certificar usando o app, tá? Então, você consegue ir pelos dois caminhos. A gente não estressou esse cenário, tá? De se a gente iria exigir ou não 2 certificações nesse caso, tá? Porque está tendo uma mudança no seu front-end ou na sua forma de trabalhar, tá? Acho que essa é uma pergunta que fica no nosso backlog aqui do Squad para a gente responder, tá?
Carlos, did you have another question? I see your hand still raised.
No, sorry.
I think we've covered all the questions in both the chat and hands raised. Are there any other questions? Miro team, are there any questions on the Zoom session that we need to address?
I believe not, Mike.
Okay, if there's no other questions, Miro team, I trust that this session will be published both in English and Portuguese and shared with the open banking ecosystem. We'll do the same on the OpenID Foundation site as well.
Yeah, so thank you for your time, Mike, Joseph, and all the other participants. If you have any questions, you can send us email, and we try to answer as quick as possible. And I think that's it. Thank you for your time, everyone.
Thank you all.
Great. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.
Eric e Raoni estão por aí?